thank you very much for that Navy introduction there from Top Gun, so I appreciate that. But I'd like to say thanks very much to Jeff and Brian and the entire FAIA team for the opportunity to come and talk to you all today about a super important topic. And what a cool conference you run here. I thought I was back at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas when I saw the itinerary yesterday. There were like 11 simultaneous parties going on. They went till 1 o'clock in the morning. There were people outside my room at 2 o'clock in the morning yelling and screaming and drinking. So, I mean, you all are having a good time. So I've changed my opinion about insurance agents. I think this is a really fun crowd. But I do appreciate the opportunity to be here, and this has been an interesting event for me to prepare for because I customize every one of my presentations because every audience is different. The technology is constantly changing. The capabilities that the hackers have is constantly changing. And so as a result, I have to take a look at each one of these and make sure that I'm hitting the sweet spot. And our company primarily works with big companies, right? These are companies that have chief information officers and chief information security officers. Several of the companies have cybersecurity budgets alone that are tens of millions of dollars. How many of y'all look like one of those companies? Go ahead, raise your hand. Anybody? We got one up here, I think, on the front row. So what I wanted to do was take a look and say, what if I were a small or mid-sized business owner? What if my IT department maybe consisted of one person? Or maybe my IT department consisted of the Best Buy Geek Squad coming in. And so I started thinking about a golf pro that my son and I work with in Panama City, Florida. Is anybody here from Panama City? Panama City Beach area, but there's one back there. So there's a golf pro there named Adam Brack, and we've been seeing him for the last 10 or 12 years off and on. And 3 or 4 years ago, I was down with Adam, and he's a two-man operation. It's him and one other golf pro that worked there. And he does his instruction, a lot of it is on video that he has to run through these computers, and that's how he makes his livelihood. And golf pros don't make a lot of money. And so we were there one time, and he was having trouble with the computer. It was all locked up. It had this, it was really the ransomware of the day. It had these false antivirus things and all those sort of things. And his business was almost coming to a halt because of what was going on with his computer, right? So it goes to show that no matter what business you're in, you're relying on that computer, the ability to connect to the internet, and you don't have the time or the expertise necessarily to figure out how to fix it when stuff goes wrong. Yet that is critical to your business continuing to operate. So as I started thinking about what I might share with you all today, I started thinking about what would Adam do? What would I advise Adam Brack to do? And so you'll hear some of that today. And so as we go through the talk this morning, I'm going to spend about the first 15 or 20 minutes kind of orienting you on the threat, making sure you understand what the challenges are that we're facing. And then I really want to get in the last portion of the talk this morning a checklist, a to-do list. Things that you can and should be thinking about, whether you have a company of 1 or 2 or 10 or 12 or 20 or 25, and I think that kind of starts hitting the sweet spot for most of you. And these are actions that you have to take, these are actions that you should take, and these are things that are going to be regulated and things that will help you actually go back and be able to feel like that you're making some progress against this very serious threat. So with that, let me, and I love that first speaker there. If I could talk about fighter pilot stories for the next 45 minutes, it would be a lot more fun. But we're going to talk about cybersecurity. There'll be some airplane pictures, don't worry. But bottom line is this is important stuff, and we'll get on with it. So as Brian mentioned, I was in the Air Force for 33 years. I spent the first 28 years flying this airplane, the F-15. It was a great honor to do that. I got to fly it in a lot of different places. And so a lot of times people want to know, well, what was your call sign? You must have had a really cool call sign, right? Like Iceman or Killer or something like that. So here's a picture of me, okay? So I was a young fighter pilot at Eglin Air Force Base in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, in the Panhandle. I had 2 assignments there. Once as a lieutenant, came back 20 years later as a colonel, the wing commander. I noticed that when I was a lieutenant, I flew more and played more golf than when I was a colonel, but it was a great assignment both times. But that was about the time the movie came out, and so I became named E.T., and the more you don't like the name, the more likely it is to stick, okay? And so it's an interesting thing about fighter pilots. There are still people today that I don't know their first name, their real first name, and so for most of my career, I was known as E.T. And so when I retired, my wife had this picture done for me, and just to clarify, that's E.T. from the neck up and me from the neck down. So for my career, I was known as E.T. And then something happened. I made this transition, and people always want to know, how did you go from being a boring fighter pilot to being a really cool cyber guy, right? Because this was kind of my life before what you see here. And then the next thing you know, I am speaking at different organizations and events, and this particular time I was speaking at something called Geek Week. So how do you go from being a fighter pilot to being somebody who talks at something called Geek Week? And so what happened to me was I was commanding the Air Force's largest combat wing. It was at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan. And I get a call from my boss, the four-star Air Force general in the Pacific, and he says, you're going to a place called Pacific Command, and you're going to be something called the J6. And what the J6 is the person that's in charge of IT and command and control systems and cyber and all of those sorts of things. And I said, no, you must be a mistake. I'm going to be the J3. That's the person in charge of operations. He says, nope, you're going to become the J6. And that's why they call them orders and assignments and not requests. Okay, so I took my orders and took my assignment, and off I went to be the J6 at Pacific Command. And I spent my last 5 years and now 3 years in the private sector working IT and cyber issues. And the point of that story is what happened was the four-star admiral that ran Pacific Command at that time said, we have to stop looking at IT and cyber as support issues. These are critical to my ability to execute our mission, okay? And that's the same thing that we hear in the private sector today, right? We can't look at IT and cyber as support things. These are critical to everybody's ability to do their business every day. So that was really part of the change in mindset that started in the military back in 2009, where commanders started saying, I have to pay attention to this. This has to be a command issue, something that I'm working myself. And so as I've worked in the private sector, I forgot about this one. Just in case you weren't paying attention, I saw this headline a couple of days ago, and I thought, I have got to bring this in here, okay? Insurance companies, a hacker's paradise, okay? And what this article was talking about was that insurance companies are becoming increasingly targeted because financial services have the tens of millions of dollars to spend on cybersecurity. And insurance companies frequently have the same type of personal information, the same type of payment information, the same types of things that these hackers can exploit. So in case you don't think you're targeted, you are. The second headline that really hit me was this one. 60% of small companies are unable to sustain their business 6 months after a cyber attack. That's a pretty telling statistic. And so for those folks that think that they can't or don't have time or don't have the resources to address this up front, you need to think again, because it's not like you get a second chance at this, right? If there's a successful cyber attack, a successful breach of your company, then odds are you're going to have some troubles surviving that particular attack. One of the things that I've found is most important, and the thing that I find, frankly, missing largely in the private sector is an appreciation for what I'll call organizational culture. What is the culture of our organization? How do we think about things? And the way we establish organizational culture is the behavior of the leadership. So leadership behavior establishes organizational culture. And so when you think about changing your organizational culture, I've run into almost no organization yet that doesn't need to change their culture in terms of how do they think about cybersecurity, how do they think about managing cyber risk, those sorts of things. And so if you're going to change that culture, though, it has to be driven by, let's just call it the CEO. Who's the senior person in that organization? Changing culture can't be delegated down. So when I talk about changing culture, then I start talking about things like, is the CEO the model user, right? Is the senior person in the company the one that is the model user? Do they follow all of the policies? Are they the last ones to complain when they're forced to change their password? Those sorts of things. Is the CEO the one that values training and understands that users are the biggest risk, right? The networks would be very secure if we didn't have to let humans use the particular networks, right? So is the CEO value that training? And then do we hold people accountable, right? No matter what size your business is, if you have somebody in the company that is not doing their job, that is putting the business at risk, you hold them accountable, right? And their job is potentially at risk. How many times do we do the same thing if people take actions on the network that put the company at risk? So this issue of accountability becomes very important. So leadership, behavior, organizational behavior is really an important aspect of cybersecurity because leadership and organizational culture are technology agnostic, right? All we know about the technology is that you're going to be using a different technology 18 months from now. The bad guys are going to have a different technology 18 months from now. So what the culture that you set in the business based on the behaviors of the leaders are what are going to allow you to deal with this threat over time. And what that basically means is that no matter what we're doing, no matter what business decision we're making, we're thinking about how does cybersecurity and how does managing cyber risk fit into that decision process. And so I'd encourage you to think about what kind of tone you set in your business, no matter how large or small it is, and do we set a tone that says we've recognized this as potentially a strategic risk for us. So what are we spending and is it working? Well, Gartner said that last year we spent $81.6 billion on cybersecurity, right? $81.6 billion. And I'll tell you what, the chances of you being hacked, if you're the object of a targeted attack, I would argue is 100%. Now, it's not a 100% chance that they're going to maybe get everything they need, but there's a 100% chance if somebody wants to get into your network, they are going to get into the network. Okay? And why is that? I've got a little video here that I want to show you, about 7 minutes, if we could bring up the video. And it will give you an idea of some of the tactics and the techniques that the bad guys are using against you. And you'll see that none of this is super technical, and it really is something you need to be aware of. So if we could go ahead and play the video.
Hackers are everywhere. From Ashley Madison to JP Morgan, from Jennifer Lawrence to the federal government, our biggest celebrities, corporations, and institutions have all been the targets of devastating cyber attacks. I wanted to see how bad a hack can get, so I invited a few of the world's best hackers to try to hack me and show me where my vulnerabilities are. And now I'm going to meet them in Las Vegas at DEF CON, the biggest hacker convention of the year, and see what they found. This might not have been the best idea. DEF CON is the biggest hacker convention of the year. It's a place where thousands of hackers come to hear talks, to demonstrate their newest hacks. It's actually a place that's so dangerous to be on the internet that they tell you to turn off the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth on your phone. And they tell you not to use the ATMs too, because those could be hacked as well. This is the DEF CON ballroom. It's sort of the main room where things are happening, and it's pretty wild. I think this is Car Hacking Village. This car is locked. Can you get me in?
I'll unlock it for you. Should be good.
Hacking is no longer like this fringe activity, and if you are at DEF CON, there's a good chance that you're here because you want to learn what could happen to you or your company.
Anyone here first time in the SCCTF? Holy crap.
I invited Chris to hack me with his team, but they're going to hack me using social engineering, which is essentially hacking without any code. They just use a phone and an internet connection.
We help people with human security issues by testing vulnerabilities for like a network test, but it's for the people network. We test those vulnerabilities, see where the holes are, and then help people learn so they can patch them.
Can we try some of this? Can we try some, see if it works?
Yeah, we probably could have our star visher here make some phone calls as
Let's do it.
Sure. Do you want to do a sample phishing call?
What's phishing?
Phishing is voice solicitation, and basically what you do is you use the phone to extract information or data points that can be used in a later attack.
Let's do it. Who are you going to call?
Maybe I'll call your cell phone provider
Okay.
and see if I can get them to give me your email address.
I bet they're good. I bet they have my back. But yeah, go for it.
I'm going to spoof from your number, so it's going to look like it's calling from you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay? My baby, I'm sorry. My husband's like, we're about to apply for a loan and we just had a baby and he's like, get this done by today. So I'm so sorry, I can't call you back. I'm trying to log into our account for uses information and I can't remember what email address we used to log the account. The baby's crying and can you help me? Awesome.
In just 30 seconds,
gmail.com?
Jessica gets my personal email address.
Now, if I needed to add our older daughter on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing that? You would have to send me a secure PIN through a text message? Yeah, well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Shh. Oh, I'm not on there either? So I thought when we got married, he added me to the account. Okay, my
Jessica uses my girlfriend's name and a fake social security number
5127.
to set up her own personal access to my account.
Wait, I'm sorry. So there's no password on my account right now? Can I set that up?
She even gets the support person to change my
Thank you
password.
so much for your help today.
So she just basically blocked me out of my own account.
I'll get her fed after this. All right, thank you.
Holy shit. So they just gave you access to my entire cell phone account.
You're gonna have to go on and change your password now because it's Jess, my name.
And all it took was a crying baby and a phone call.
Yes.
I really thought that my cell phone company would protect me. I mean, like, this is the most basic stuff, and they're not doing it. And if they're not doing it, you know all these other businesses aren't doing it either. Anyone with a phone and an internet connection can do social engineering. But I was curious, what can a hacker with serious coding skills do?
Well, DEF CON is the world's biggest hacking convention. It's hacking everything, hacking social, hacking hardware, hacking software, hacking various systems.
I asked Dan Tentler, a well-known security researcher, to turn all of his firepower on me.
I did get into quite a number of things that I found.
So what were the first things you did? How did you start hacking me?
I quickly found your Squarespace blog and had an idea. Basically what I did was created a bogus Squarespace site and sent an email to you, a fish asking you to go to this website, run this certificate installer.
And I did it, because
Yeah.
I'm an idiot.
So once you ran that, it gave me access to your computer, and I created several fake pop-ups that looked like system pop-ups that would ask you for your credentials.
You didn't even have to have my passwords.
No, you gave them to me.
I gave them to you.
Yeah. So I stole your 1Password keychain.
And 1Password is where I store all my other passwords. So effectively
And
by...
your social security number and your Amex stuff and all your stock trading and bank information. I can send email to everyone in this room as you. I am you right now, if I wanted to be. If my evilness is working correctly, it should actually be taking pictures of your desktop and pictures through your webcam every 2 minutes. And I have been watching you for about 2 days now. In coffee shops, at your mom's house, on a plane. Here's you editing stuff. There's you like.
Oh my God,
looking
so this
nervous.
is literally
Every 2 minutes.
through my webcam.
Yeah, through this guy.
How badly could you have messed up my life?
I could have made you homeless. I could have made you homeless and penniless.
How?
Like,
How would you make me homeless?
Like I have control of your digital life in its entirety. I have all your credentials. I have all your access to all your financial information, all your work information, all your personal information. I can pay people with your bank account or your Amex account. I am you. I can fully impersonate. Like the only thing I couldn't doctor would be like your fingerprints.
This is like as bad as it gets.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's bad.
So it turns out that Dan Tentler is
Okay, you
very
can go
good
ahead
at his
and stop the
job.
video,
I mean,
please.
he hacked the hell out of me.
So there's several things I like about that particular video. First, regardless of whether you're an independent insurance agent working in Gainesville, Florida, or you're Willis Re, or you're General Motors, or you're Boeing, the process that hackers are going to use to try to get into your system are exactly like these. It's going to start with a social engineering phase. They're going to figure out who's in the company. They're going to use Facebook and LinkedIn and those sorts of things. They're going to start sending you various emails, and the phishing emails are getting more and more clever every day, and they are going to figure out a way to trick you into getting into the network. The other thing that I like about this video is it gives you a pretty realistic look at what the hacker mindset is, right? I just read an article yesterday, 70% of hackers do this just for the fun of it, right? Or the challenge of it, or those sorts of things. And so they enjoy doing that, and a lot of them, because I've worked with a lot of them, have that same kind of level of hubris that he has. I can control your entire life, right? So there are people out there that aren't necessarily targeting you because you have a lot of money that they can take advantage of. There's people that are targeting you sometimes just because they've randomly looked through the internet, they found somebody with a vulnerability, and now they've decided to see what they could do, okay? So this whole culture of hacking and the objectives behind it are varied and they're dangerous. So when we think about threat actors and their methods, there's kind of four that we usually characterize. The nation-state hacker, and what we're worried about at a national strategic level is China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and then what we call the VEOs, the violent extremist organizations. These are all the terrorist organizations that are using social media and that sort of thing. And the nation-state hackers, normally at your level, you aren't thinking about it, but I'll tell you in a minute why you should be thinking about it. The next group as we talk about is the insider threat. So this is maybe the disgruntled employee, somebody that has a bone to pick with the company. They're particularly dangerous because they have access to the network, they have credentials, all of that sort of thing, and so it's hard to detect that there's something going on that shouldn't be going on. The next are targeted criminals, definitely something you have to be concerned with. They're going after personally identifiable information. They're going after trying to trick you into transferring money into an account that they want to have it transferred into, those sorts of things. And the criminal element is obviously a serious threat to every business. And then finally, there's the hacktivists, which we don't see too much of the straight hacktivists. Remember the good old days when the worst thing you had to worry about was having your website defaced? But the hacktivists are still out there. But we always looked at capability and intent. From an intelligence perspective, we'd like to know who has the capability to go after us and who also has the intent. And intent is very hard to derive, but we tried to look at those two. But unfortunately, what's happened over time is that you can go on the dark web and you can find websites like this. This is a screenshot off the dark web where I can basically go in there and I can buy tools, back to my nation state example, I can buy tools and capabilities and hire people to use them. And these are tools and capabilities and people with skills that I saw inside the government 3 years ago are available on the outside now. Ransomware is the latest. You can go online and for $5,000 you can buy a ransomware package that allows you to have everything you need from being able to create the phishing email, to encrypting the files on the person's computer, to setting up the Bitcoin account to help them be able to pay you off at the end of this. So the point is regardless of which of those threats you think may be applicable to you, the tools and the capabilities are out there. One of the most interesting sites I saw recently, about 6 months ago, is you can go in there and say, I want to get into this company, I want to get this information, and now it's like an eBay or a Craigslist thing. You put out a list to have people bid against it, people come back and bid against that particular job, then you hire them, and then they go out and execute the job. So the proliferation of the tools and the capabilities and the expertise is rampant. The market's driving down the price, and so everybody has to be worried about potentially a pretty advanced threat. And so what's it costing? There's 3 levels of cost. Direct costs, these are things that the average small business has to clean up after a cyber attack. There you go, that's the latest from an institute called Ponemon, and they do a lot of these types of surveys, $690,000. How many people could absorb $690,000 and just keep on going, right? Probably not a lot at the small and mid-sized business level. And these direct costs are things like, what does it cost to recover my data? What does it cost to offer identity insurance to the people who had their data breached? What does it cost to be able to get my business back up and running? All of those operational costs. And then there's a second level of cost, which third-party liabilities. And so if you look at the liability issue, the challenge with that is we still haven't decided who is liable in the event of a hack. Look, this was settled May 24, 2017, over 3 years after the Target hack, and they're still settling liability claims. And you all know better than I do that liability claims are normally settled and paid by the people that have the most money to pay for it. But the point of this is that we don't have really the case law, we don't have the precedent, we really haven't decided where the liability falls in here. And we'll talk a minute again about third-party liability, vendors, those sorts of things when we get kind of to the action checklist. But liability and third-party liability is a set of costs that's very hard to estimate. And then the third area is what I call intangibles. And this gives you an idea of what the challenge is of intangibles. This was an Experian survey that said 20% of consumers will stop doing business with a company that loses track of their critical data or their personal information, okay? And so that's definitely gonna have an impact on your business. And sometimes I show this statistic and I get pushback. Well, people will go, well, Target's stock price is still the same as whatever it was, and they've still got the same number of customers. Yeah, but do they have the same customers? And what would the stock price be if they hadn't been hacked? And all those sorts of things. And that's a big company like Target that can absorb a lot of that. $18.5 million, that's a lot of money to us. Not a lot of money to Target, but it's still $18.5 million that they really didn't want to lay out there. there. So this issue of third-party liability is really complex. And so when you look at this, and we'll talk more about insurance in a minute, but when you look at this again from the insurance perspective, which you all would appreciate, when you start thinking about, how do I really understand the potential consequences of a loss, and how do I cover that either as the insured or the person offering the insurance, it gets very hard to estimate those costs. You can get to the direct cost, $690,000 in that case. Start to get to the liability, it's hard to figure out. And then when you get to these intangibles, right, these things like how much operational friction did I have while I was waiting to clean this up? How many customers did I lose because I was having to spend time figuring out this cyber breach thing that I had to deal with? What kind of additional oversight and regulation have I brought on me personally, or have I brought on my industry as a result of having a very public breach? So these intangible costs are very hard to estimate, and they're real, and they have a big impact. And I would argue that that's what really goes to that earlier point I showed you. 60% of small businesses can't survive after 6 months of a hack, and a lot of that relies on that intangibles area. So how does this guy get into my network? All hackers look like this. They're hoodies, and they can't see your face, so that's what they look like. Bottom line is your network is just like this igloo. I can look around the audience and I can see there's some people that are as old as I am, and you always had to have a Gary Larson cartoon in your slideshow, right? And so this was the one with the polar bears, and they're going in. I've had to explain this to millennials exactly what this means. I just love these things, crunchy on the outside, chewy on the inside. I explained to them there was somebody inside, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line, your network is like this igloo, right? And what we do is we set up a perimeter defense. We build some castle walls and moats around it. But once you get through there, it's very easy to get to what you want based on how we secure these. And so I'm going to give you about a 2-minute primer on how we do network defense. And so this is kind of your network, or this is a generic network. It has what we call endpoints. So it's got laptops and desktops and mobile devices and those sorts of things that can access the network. If your company has more than 4 or 5 computers in it, you've probably got some kind of server that hosts some applications and that sort of thing. You store data in there, and it could be a variety of company data. It can be client data. It can be personal data, whatever it is. Most of you probably don't have a company of a sufficient size to have what's called its own DNS, domain name service. And the only reason I mention that, what that particular device does is when you type in google.com, it translates it to the IP address, 10.2. Whatever it happens to be. And so a very popular attack method, which you could be subject to, is they get into that DNS server. So when you type in google.com, it doesn't send you to the real google.com. It sends you to something that looks a lot like what you thought you were going to, but you're actually on some kind of a malicious website. And what we do is we try to protect this with these types of things. First thing is we try to surround it with network hygiene. Are we running current software? Is it patched? Did I get you to change your password from something other than password? All of those sorts of things. And then the next thing, no matter how big or small your company is, you've got some type of a firewall, hopefully. I've got a firewall at my house, for example. You're running antivirus. If you're a little larger company, you may have things called intrusion detection systems and intrusion protection systems. But again, these are things that are based on, we've already seen this particular attack. We load what we call the signature into the system, and then it will block those, which is great if you've seen the attack before. And then the next level is more sophisticated things. For most small businesses, they aren't going to have these sorts of things. They're more advanced techniques, sandboxes and honeypots. That first thing is called a SIEM, a Security Incident Event Management. As you get into the cybersecurity business, you'll find that even a very small company will have much more information coming in from its firewalls and all that than it can process. And so SIEMs allow you to look at that data. Again, something not necessarily applicable to a small business. But user training, that's applicable to everybody. We highlighted before that most estimates say over 90% of hacks begin with something that the user did, right? Again, humans are the most vulnerable piece of this, and it's the things that they do on the network that make this a really difficult problem. And so what happens is, one of these very well-meaning people, they're going to click on a link. They're going to go to a website. They're going to take a thumb drive that they got at the FAIA conference, and they're going to put it in their computer, and it's got some kind of malware on it. And what that's going to do is going to let this guy get into your network. And once he gets into the network, he is now bypassed, because he was able to go get those credentials, just like in the video, he has bypassed all of those castle walls, right? All the money you spent on firewalls and antivirus and user training and all of those sorts of things, he has bypassed because you've essentially opened the door and let him in. And it's very hard to detect him because he's using the credentials of one of your employees. So he looks like somebody that's authorized to be there. And so now he moves laterally through the network through all of these components. And those crown jewels, which is why you care about the network, that's your critical data, that's what makes your business run. The next thing you know, this guy's into it and he's exfiltrating it. And that's when it starts to get really expensive. So how well you set up those perimeter walls, how well you protect those crown jewels, are you able to detect the fact that something is not exactly right, all drives your ability to respond to this and to be able to deal with these particular threats. So if you haven't taken notes up to this point, what I'm going to do now is I've got about 6 or 7 points that if I were going back and seeing my friend Adam Brack right now, or you asked me to come to your office, these are the things that I think are the most important to think about. And these are things whether you have an IT shop of one, or you are the IT shop, or you have a contractor that comes in, these are all things that if you haven't checked on and you haven't looked at, these are things that I would start looking at. First thing is you got to understand what are the regulations, right? And I think everybody is probably familiar in here with the NAIC model cyber law. Yet another regulatory measure was what this organization called it, but is everybody familiar with that and what's coming down the pipe? I don't know if you've read it, but it's pretty easy to find online. And what it does is it talks about a lot of things you have to do as you become subject to this particular regulation and oversight. And you know, it's really basic things if you're working in this business, but it's not basic things if you don't work in this business every day. It's stuff like, do you have a written plan? Do you have a way to protect data? Do you have encryption? Do you monitor the identity of the people that are on your network? All those sorts of things. So if you're a small business, how do you even start to comply with that oversight and regulation? And so one of the things that they reference in there is an organization called NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And NIST, about 4 or 5 months ago, put out this particular document, and I would take note of this. You can find it if you just Google NIST Small Business. You will be able to find this online. It's only about 32 pages long, okay? And what it is it's a subset, you will, of a much larger NIST standard for cybersecurity that has been written and has been largely adopted for protection of critical infrastructure, things like the power grid, water, telecommunications, transportation, that sort of thing. And so, again, about 32 pages. It's got a good summary of kind of what the threat landscape is, what type of things you should be thinking about. Then it goes through a discussion of risk, right? Because ultimately this is a risk management challenge for you, right? It's not the most important thing you do. It's one of many risks that you have to manage, and nobody understands risk and managing risk any better than folks in the insurance business. But what it helps you step through in there is it gives you some charts and some tables and some ways to think about, okay, I can't mitigate or transfer all of these risks. How do I focus on the risks that are most relevant to my business? And allows you to step through that. And then it goes through some sections similar to what I'm going to talk to you about here in just a minute of some specific tasks you can do. So when that model cyber law talks about, do you have a written plan? One of the things that the model cyber law references is the NIST standards. So I'd say if you didn't have any place else to start, that if you could go here and you could start looking at this NIST framework. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to fill out every chart, fill out every table, that sort of thing. But if you have started here and you can demonstrate that you have taken a disciplined approach to this against an accepted framework and standard, it's going to do 2 things for you. One, it's going to help you be compliant with this as that regulation and everything and oversight eventually reaches down to you. It's also going to position you much better when you start working with maybe larger companies in that as a vendor or supporter there when they start asking you questions like, before you connect to my network, I'm going to ask you certain things about how you manage your own cybersecurity. And it also gives you ideas of what to ask people that you're going to let connect to your network. So I would highly recommend that you take a look at this document and see where you can apply this in your own business. And as I extract things from there, these next 5 or 6 things are those things that I talked about at the beginning that I would go back and start asking questions about. You know, the first thing is my crown jewels, my critical data. And there's 5 questions you should ask about that. Number 1, what is it? And that means what business information, what data, what kind of things do I either store on my computer, or if I store it in iCloud or Dropbox or wherever it is, what is that data that if it were stolen, manipulated, destroyed, would have a strategic impact on my business? And if you haven't identified that yet for your company, you need to do that. And then you've got to know, where is it? And a lot of times you'll find when you start really figuring out where it is that there's more copies of it than you thought. okay? And so understanding where it is and saying it's in the cloud is not good enough, right? Because in the cloud, you realize the cloud is just somebody else's computer that's holding your data, right? So understanding where it is really important. And then the next thing you want to know is it encrypted? Is it encrypted? Because if that guy gets into your network, right, after hours, whatever it is, and the data is sitting on that server or sitting on that hard drive or sitting in that cloud storage area, wherever you have it, and it's encrypted, then when he steals it, he is not going to be able to use it. It's not going to be of value to him. And they immediately understand if the data is encrypted. So is it encrypted? And then is it backed up? And backing up your critical data is what's going to allow you to deal with the current biggest threat that we hear a lot about, which is ransomware, right? That's when somebody gets into your computer, they encrypt the files, and then they send you an email and say, if you want to get your files unencrypted, then you've got to pay us in Bitcoin. And if you don't understand Bitcoin, we've set up a Bitcoin account for you, and here's the website and the link, and you just give them your credit card, they'll transfer that to Bitcoin, they make it all very easy. You don't want to have to go through that, right? Because you don't know whether they're going to give you the key to unencrypt it afterwards. So is that critical data backed up, and is it backed up in a way that it's not going to be subject to the same type of attack, right? Cloud backups are usually pretty good. Backups on site are good as long as they're not always connected to the network, but backing up that critical data is super important. And then you've got to know who has access to it, right? Do all the people that have access to it really need access to it? And if John or Sue has access to the critical data, do they need access to all of the critical data, or can you set it up where they only get access to those particular areas that they need access to? And then when somebody leaves the company, okay, when somebody leaves the company, do I take away their access to the network? Do I take away their access to the data? I mean, geez, even in the baseball business, you remember that story a couple of years ago? The guy went from one baseball team to the other baseball team. They didn't take away his password or his access to the data, and he just logged back on and stole the information about the player trades, all right? So it happens everywhere. So very important to understand and have a process, no matter how small or large your business is. When people come into my company and go out from my company, do I make a deliberate decision about what they're going to have access to? And when they leave, for whatever the reason is, do I make sure that I've taken that access away and taken the appropriate protections there? So ask these 5 questions about your critical data, because this is the crown jewels of your company. This is the area that is going to have a significant impact on your ability to survive beyond that 6 months we talked about. And we touched on this briefly. It's this issue of third-party liability, third-party responsibilities. Even in our company, as we start working with, and we work with a lot of big companies, we get these questionnaires that are 500 and 600 and 700 questions about all of our procedures. Do we have these policies? Do we have these procedures in place? Can you prove it? All of those sorts of things. And increasingly, if you haven't experienced it, as you start to work with larger organizations than yourself, you're going to get asked those questions. And so that's why I mentioned before, being able to say that you're compliant or you're measuring yourself against that NIST small business standard would be a great place to start. And then if you're a company that is a position where you have vendors, maybe you have an IT vendor, maybe you have some other type of vendor that you find it necessary for them to access your computer system, what have you done to make sure that they've got some element of security in progress? Again, if you go back to the Target piece, that's how the Target hack happened, right? They had an HVAC contractor who they let have access to their billing or their purchase order system so that they could do the appropriate billing for managing the HVAC system. Their security wasn't particularly good. Somebody got a password in there. That allowed them to get into the Target system from the HVAC contractor, and then Target didn't have a very good way to prevent that lateral movement I showed you earlier. So the person was able to go from the purchase order system into the point of sale system, et cetera. And so that third-party liability, as you want to connect to other companies, they're going to want to know a lot about how you are controlling access, what your security considerations are, and then if you're going to let anybody connect to your network, you should be asking a basic set of questions as well. Because again, that third-party liability responsibility can be expensive as well. Software. This was really highlighted. Everybody knows about WannaCry. You at least saw that in the headlines, right, a couple of weeks ago. That was a ransomware attack, right? So they got into computers, they encrypted files, and then they wanted to be paid off in Bitcoin to get the files back. And one of the biggest vulnerabilities that they exploited when they conducted this particular attack was they went after software that's what we call end of life, all right? So these were things like Windows XP, Windows Server 2003. They call it end-of-life software because Microsoft or whoever the software developer is, they get to a certain point and they go, we aren't going to continue to patch and maintain that software, right? It's just, there's not enough people using it, there's no business model for it. And companies will find that they're running end-of-life software. If you're running end-of-life software, sometimes you're doing it because there is no current software that will do that particular business function. If you are doing that, you really need to look hard at what that function is, and you may need to invest in some other solution because running end-of-life software is a very dangerous proposition. The second thing that came out in there was not just the current software, but is it patched? And there happen to be, and what patches are is that periodically the software companies will push something to you usually, and it's a patch to the software. It's an update to the software. Sometimes it fixes bugs, sometimes it adds new features, but what you're really worried about in this context is it usually closes some critical security vulnerability. And why they release the patches at the times they do is because somebody in the hacker world has found a vulnerability in their software, and before it's even public, it's been posted to these hacker forums for about a week before, a lot of times before the company even finds out about it. And if it's really critical, like it was in WannaCry, like in that case, Microsoft pushed something called an out-of-cycle critical update, okay? And so a lot of people didn't apply that update, and as a result, they got hacked. So your company, no matter how big or small it is, take a look at the software. Are you running it? You're running current software, and do you have it set up where it is updated? And there may be a little bit of money involved to get to that current software level, but this is one of the easiest ways and one of the most important ways you can protect yourself. The password keeper. I don't know how many people know what a password keeper is. It was mentioned in the video. They talked about, I forget what he talked about, 1Pass. I use something called LastPass. But this issue of complex passwords, not using the same password for more than one site, especially in your case, especially small business owners, making sure that you aren't using the same passwords for business as you are in your personal life. All of that business about passwords is extremely important. And at some point, the technology will get us past passwords. But for the near term, passwords, they're going to continue to be a factor. And when they tell you that it should be 12 to 16 characters and it should have capitals and punctuation and all that stuff in there, that's exactly right, because there are all sorts of software programs now that can go through and crack passwords, and they maintain lists of the most common passwords, right? And every year at the top of the list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and other things like that, but they have much more sophisticated algorithms that can go through and figure out these passwords. And the bottom line is the fewer different characters you use and the shorter the password it is, the more likely one of these password crackers is going to work to find your particular password. And so who can keep up with all of those? They've got a various number of these products where they will run on your computer, part of your browser. You can click a button and say, generate a password. I want a 16-character password, should have these things in it. And then it's all stored in the password keeper. It will then load it into the website automatically if you want it to, those sorts of things. And the bottom line is, you just need to remember one password to be able to access all of that. Can that be hacked? Yeah, there was a password company that just had a hack. They didn't get to the passwords because of the way they encrypted the passwords and those sorts of things. But I would argue that a password keeper for your business and your personal life is much better than keeping it on your computer in a file labeled password, okay? So password keepers are something good to use. You'll find them a little clunky at first, but I would definitely have one for my business. The ones that they have the business applications, you can set it up for your company so that everybody can access it at the company. You can share the applicable passwords, but they're all stored in this area, and it makes it much more secure and easier to use that way. MFA, anybody know what that means? And don't get too clever, okay? It stands for multi-factor authentication, okay? And that's when, I'm sure some of you maybe have it with your bank accounts now, where you have to put your username in, you put your password in, and then they text you a number, right? And that number you now have to enter also to get into your particular application. This is one of the easiest and best ways to secure your critical data, okay? Because if somebody does steal your username and password, which frankly may not be that hard, like in a phishing exercise or something like that, they are not likely to have your cell phone, right, to be able to get that particular text message. So multi-factor authentication, implementing that both internal to your company, right, maybe on the website that people access to do business with you, and wherever you do business where you use your personal data is super important. And so you can go to a website, it's called www.turnon2fa.com, and there's a lot of information on two-factor, and you can put in things like, you know, a particular retailer you do business with or that sort of thing, and it'll tell you if they offer two-factor authentication, and if they do, it will tell you how to set it up. Okay, how about secure email and file sharing? I know that you all do a lot of things with passing around personal information, personally identifiable information, other critical things with your clients, probably with other agents, back with other insurance companies, those sorts of things. If you aren't using some kind of a secure email system, something that encrypts the email, and there's a variety of them that are out there, some are built into Outlook and they meld very well with those, then you're really opening yourself up to some serious liability issues. Same thing with secure file sharing. Maybe use Dropbox or OneDrive or any of those kind of things in order to store things or maybe to share those files with different people. There's ways to encrypt that. There's ways to secure that. You need to make sure that you have thought about and have looked at options for secure email and secure file sharing. Because again, somebody gets into the system, everything's encrypted, everything's protected, and is not useful to them. So secure email, secure file sharing are something that you need to consider. And then what do you do with your website? I think it would be hard to find a business that doesn't have some kind of a web presence. It could go all the way from just advertising your hours and the services you offer to being able to go in and make payments and do things on your policy, all those sorts of things. About 60% of websites out there are vulnerable to pretty basic hacks, okay? And so if you haven't had your website tested by some type of a third party, then you probably need to do that. And the person that should test it is not the same person that built the website for you, okay? So there's a variety of ways. If you've got vulnerabilities in your website, hackers can get in there and they can scrape off the personal data that your customers enter in there. Another thing that they can do is, depending on how your website connects to the back end of your business, there's ways that they can exploit vulnerabilities in the website to go from the website into your critical data. And then the third area you should be concerned with is, it kind of goes back to the hacktivist thing, but they go and load malware on your website. Maybe they don't want anything to do with your business. They just want a website where they can put malware so that when people visit the website, they pick up that malware. And so the last thing you want is one of your customers to go, hey, I went to your website and picked up a bunch of malware. I think that's a problem. I'm going to find somebody else to work with. So if you have a website that you use to do business and you haven't had it tested, and I'll throw out one quick acronym to think about, whoever you're going to have it tested, it's called OWASP. If you think about WASP to be, so OWASP, that's the Organization for Web Application Security Protocols. They have the standard for testing websites. And it's not super expensive to do. It should cost you maybe a couple of $1,000s, but that is a really critical vulnerability in your business. All right, so imagine you're on an airplane and they've just said, hey, the door is closed and you got to go into airplane mode, and you get this picture texted to you, okay? And you look at it and you go, that looks like the security cameras in the house that I just built when I moved to Durham, North Carolina last summer. And in fact, that's my Suburban in the driveway. Well, now luckily I know those guys. That's Lee on the left and Stuart on the right. They work for me, and they are, no kidding, nation state level hackers. They were in the government, they work for our company now. And what I did was I gave them the IP address, right, essentially the street address of the computers in my house, and I said, I want to see if you guys can get into this security system. It took them about 3 hours, but they had control of the security system. And so there's all sorts of interesting things that fall out from this. Is one, have your stuff tested, right? If you're relying on security systems and whatever you're relying on, websites, those sorts of things, you need to occasionally have those tested, because you can't trust, right, that those things are secure. The second thing that came out of that was when I called the company that built the security system, it took about 25 minutes to get somebody on the phone who understand I was just trying to help them out and report that they had a big security vulnerability. So you should think about it from your perspective. Are you ready to get a phone call from somebody that says, hey, I think you breached my data, or I think there's a problem with your website? So testing your stuff and then being prepared for somebody to give you a call and saying you've got a problem is something you should also be thinking about. And when you do it, make sure you get somebody that really knows what they're doing. If you want, I can get you Lee and Stuart. All right, and then insurance. Had a good talk last night with Doug, the incoming chairman, about insurance. Cyber insurance is still a bit of the Wild West. Normally when I talk to audiences, I'm talking about what kind of cyber insurance do you have? Do you really understand what the exclusions are? Do you really understand all of the aspects of what kind of things will be covered and what things will not be covered? As you all know, that definitions and standards in cyber insurance continue to change, and we haven't gotten there yet. And then flip side of that is if you're trying to provide cyber insurance, all those things we talked about earlier. How do you estimate the cost? How do you really know what the cost of a breach is going to be? And then the other thing that would really concern me if I were providing cyber insurance is the latest Verizon report said that the hacker lives in your network. It's getting better. It was 146 days last year. Now it's 99 days. So they live in your network for 99 days. So if you're providing cyber insurance to somebody, how do you know they are already on day 98 of the hack, right? And so this whole understanding of both sides of the cyber insurance issue are really important. And so if you're relying on cyber insurance, right, to cover some of that $690,000 in costs out there, you need to make sure you understand the policy. How does it fit into your insurance tower? Can you leverage E&O insurance or CGL insurance, or as I talked to boards, D&O insurance to cover this? Very complicated right now, and it's still evolving. So you should really need to understand what your insurance is if you have it. And at the end, based on everything I've told you today, right, you have to assume that you're going to be hacked, and then you got to be prepared, okay? And a lot of the preparation is not the technical stuff. Hopefully you got some backups. Hopefully you've got somebody you can call to help you recover from this. But what you really need to know is, what am I going to tell my customers, right, so they maintain confidence that my business will survive and grow and continue to protect them? Because nobody expects you to be completely immune to an attack, but they do expect you to be prepared. So what am I going to tell my customers? What am I going to tell my employees? The first people to sue Sony were their employees. And then third, what am I going to tell the oversight people, the regulators, law enforcement, all of those folks, okay? So understanding that as a business leader is what I'm really talking about when assume you'll be hacked and be prepared to deal with that. Okay, so let me see. Oh, I know the last thing. Yahoo and Google. So Yahoo and Google were both hacked in 2010, right? And what they did was Google took the point of view that said, we're going to hire 100 security engineers and we're going to address this cybersecurity thing. Yahoo said, nope, we aren't going to do that. It's going to be a drag on revenue. It's going to ruin the customer experience, all of that. What happened? Yahoo gets hacked again. People are leaving Yahoo now to go to Google. When I open my phone, I've got a thing called a Google Authenticator, which is a way to do MFA, multi-factor authentication, right? So is Google a security company? Are they a web company? What are they? The point is they changed their culture, and so security is going to be part of their culture. So when you start thinking about some of these measures you have to take in your company, think about, is this really ruining the customer experience, or are my customers looking for me to approach security a little more seriously? So think about where you're going to be, a Yahoo or a Google. And then the last thing I would offer is, and I know we don't have time for questions, but I encourage you to take my email down. I'm happy to respond. There's my website. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. I post a lot of articles that are, I really try to guide these at directors and CEOs and business leaders so that you can get little tidbits of information, things to think about as you work through your business. So please connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to share that information with you. So again, thanks to FAIA for the opportunity to talk to you today. Sorry to be kind of a downer after that great music in the morning and then the talk out there, but this is serious business. You have to take it seriously. You can't afford to wait until you're being hacked. And so hopefully those steps that I gave you gives you some ideas when you go back home and go back to work, some things that you can do to make yourself a little harder target. You don't have to spend $81.6 billion, right? And it's a lot like the bear. I don't have to run faster than the bear. I just have to run faster than the person next to me. So make yourself a little bit of a harder target, lower your risk, and you'll be prepared. Okay? All right, best of luck to y'all. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.